right, everyone, I'll call the meeting to order. Ngā mihi nui, kia koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki tēnei hui. Welcome everyone to this month's Audit and Risk meeting. A number of very important items to go through today. First of all, I'll welcome the team from Audit New Zealand, Julian and Sam here, and we look forward to the presentation at the end of the public meeting, and just had the discussion with Julian that we will have councillor only time at the end of at that meeting in PX. So for any questions we want to ask or anything that the auditor wishes to tell us with just councillors present, we can do so then. So without any further ado, I'll call for any apologies. I don't believe there are any as such. All present. Conflicts of interest?
Nothing registered.
Okay, nothing that's come up since then with anybody. Doesn't appear to be so. Matters under investigation, David, there was just the one item presented to come to this meeting, which I believe we do have.
Yes, we do.
To be presented.
Yes.
Thank you. We'll move to minutes of the Audit and Risk Subcommittee held here on the 2nd of September, pages 7 to 13. Moved Bob, seconded me Sam. Any discussion around those minutes? If not, call for a vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Audit and Risk Chair. Number of items. Obviously, we've just had a site visit to Pines Resource Recovery Park. Perhaps a little bit truncated because of the morning, but very productive, and it was good to go through and see the level of health and safety compliance by our contractor there, Sycon. They're running a very tight ship, and a number of major contracts happening there at present with the development. So it was good to get an overview of where that sits and the issues that may or may not arise because of that, and the ongoing operation, increased ongoing size of operation there, particularly around the green waste composting. So all in all, a worthy outcome, and probably will help us feed into our what level of health and safety reporting I think that we will require going forward. The other thing of note that we've had, already mentioned, obviously, Audit New Zealand, presenting to us today with our annual report, but we also have held as a subcommittee a series of workshops which have gone through a range of topics. Obviously, we've got statutory requirement to do in terms of reference, but we looked about at where health and safety sits and reporting schedules for us as a subcommittee, and further work will come out of that, and possibly around looking at not reporting on every topic at every meeting, that we may do this as a quarterly type thing, depending on what it is, what topic we're going to be discussing. Went through sensitive expenditure best practice, assessment of risk appetite, which was a very worthwhile exercise, and unfortunately, Annalisa, you weren't at the last one, but the spreadsheet that you sent through was certainly very useful in our discussion, and particularly thank Kelvin too for leading us through that in the presentation. It was very worthwhile. Obviously, we talked about the 2021 work plan and priorities for the subcommittee going forward. But I think most importantly, those workshops were something that I've wanted to achieve from the start of this triennium, and obviously events have overtaken us and probably weren't as timely as we would have liked in a COVID world. But for me, it's about empowering this committee to take on their role and to present good, robust information and recommendations through to Greater Council. And with that in mind, I think we'll go forward, and the training that we require to allow us to do that will be very crucial. We had a good discussion around that. It's my duty, I think, as chair, to enable everyone sitting around this table to contribute to those discussions and not have it dominated by myself as chair, that everyone contributes to that process, and everyone's input is valued. That will be my verbal report for this month. I'll so move. Second, Sam, all in favour? Against? Carried. David, Chief Executive's report, 14 to 26, a number of items there.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody. So I just wanted to pick up from the Chair's comments. Firstly, thanking everybody for your input to the 2 workshops that we've had. For me, they're both incredibly valuable in terms of the outcomes that are coming from those. There are a number of action points which will be reported back, excuse me, on our agenda for our November meeting. Things that we've advanced already, Internal Health and Safety Committee, we've discussed that at exec level and put an outline in place, and that will be reported back for adoption by the subcommittee in November, along with terms of reference reporting, and also the last comment that the chair made, which was in reference to training. And I think post-election, or just probably more post-Christmas, there'll be a number of opportunities that will be available to us in terms of response to legislation and some of the other risk and reward requirements that we need to undertake. Also thinking about site visits for next year. So our December meeting will be thinking about external site visits that we want to take. You've been on some this year, you've seen the value of those. You may well want to think about some of those activity and or risk areas that you want to have a further look at next year. In terms of the report itself, we've made reference to cyber security and fraud and corruption awareness survey, which I'll ask Craig Moody if there's anything that, Craig, you want to add to the comments that you've made so far on those.
So we just had a brief update session with Deloitte in regards to the survey. So there was 156 responses that included staff, some contractors that work on site, and also councillors completed the survey. There was also 88 responses that were partially completed. So we got some of the free text information from that, but that wasn't included in the survey, or won't be included in the survey results as such, because it was kind of partially completed survey answers. So we'll just work through with Deloitte and then report back to the next meeting any concerns that arise.
Great, thanks for that. Item number 3 is FYI, and item number 4 references to the OAG bulletin attached to the agenda. The specific area of interest is around planning for long-term, the long-term plan, the 21/31 long-term plan, the processes that we're putting in place. The next meeting of the Canterbury Long-Term Plan Managers Group is on Wednesday of next week, where we have not only the 11 councils in attendance, but we also have executive representation both from Audit New Zealand and from the Office of the Auditor General as well. So that'll help us just focus on some of the key issues that we need to be aware of, particularly around statutory changes that we're aware of at the moment, and also the impact of Three Waters and potentially other economic recovery areas from COVID. Happy to answer any questions with in regard to the content, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, David. I guess there's advice there in your report around matters that we have to take into consideration and those changes to LTP process. And obviously that would be good if that document went through to full council as well, so that all elected members can read through that. Very interesting read, and obviously is a reflection of a change in focus, I guess, nationally and internationally, about where our priorities may lie. So any further questions for David on that report? If not, I'll ask for a mover and seconder for that report. Moved Deborah, seconded Shane. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, David. Item 4, Projects Accountant, Major Projects Financial Report, page 27 to 39. Craig, I suspect there won't be a lot to ask here, and my suggestion is that we take it as read rather than you go through line by line. It appears to my reading of it that we're progressing extremely well with all of those major projects, and there's nothing unexpected really happening out of that. If there are any questions from the committee, I think it might be better if we pose them as questions rather than have you read through each project and prolong the process, if that's okay with you. Deborah?
So I shouldn't be concerned with reading the unexpected payments submitted today being $700,000.
Bob.
Yeah, just on the aquatic centre, the condensation and such like, is that something that is going to happen in other buildings that we're doing, or is it just because of the heat report?
They advised that it was due to the increased pressure. There's a pressure system that will actually change condensation out, and there has to be it's the same reason why bolts fail.
Might be me.
Seem to be having a wee bit of trouble with our intercoms, but I'll try and keep up with who was where. Annalisa, yes.
Yeah. As you've heard me previously, major projects is my area of passion, so I will probably talk about this every month. I do have quite a few granular questions, but given the time and the content of the agenda, I think we can kind of park them, and I can probably cover them off with management later. But I do want us to shift and work towards maybe in the first quarter of next year to a project dashboard for every project, so that there's one page project dashboard for every single project. We're reporting on the same things for every project. Is that consistent? And I know we've had conversations around maybe I need more content. I don't need more content. I just want it to be crisper, because I'm still, when I'm looking at the individual projects, I'm still looking at 3 different numbers when we talk about baseline budget, and then we talk about risks and contingency. I can't see that alignment between risk and contingency, because there's a comment in there that says for some particular projects there are no risks, but then we've got a contingency / variation. So I'd like to see, I know that we haven't, we're not performing any kind of formal QRA or quantifying those risks, but I'd still like to see some kind of line item, even if it's at the high level, of what we think those risks are and the value of those risks, so that when I'm reading that report, and I think that will all come out if we have that one dashboard per project. So I won't take up any more time on the kind of more granular comments by project that I've got, but I think if we can move towards that project dashboard, it will take a little bit of time to implement, but maybe we look at it in the first quarter of next year, a new refreshed kind of view of what our projects are, because they are very important. It's what we're doing. We're delivering big projects. And also with Dan's work in health and safety, I was a little bit disappointed to get to the end of the Audit and Risk Committee pack and read about health and safety as the last item. Like, I want that to be in with projects and further up the agenda, so that, as you know, when agendas go on and on and on and people get fatigued and you get to the last items, we very quickly move through those last items. So health and safety should never be at the end of the agenda. But of course, Dan, giving him some time, will work through that. So yeah, that's enough from me. But as I say, major projects is my passion. So you will, until it gets to the level that I want it to be, I'll probably every month will chip on a bit. Yep, absolutely. Yep, of course. Yep.
Yeah. Thanks, Kelvin. Yeah, that's a good summation of the discussion we had around the workshop table. So absolutely take on board those comments, and Lisa, they're absolutely valid, and that's the level of reporting that we want to arrive at here too. It'll be a conversation that we have amongst all of us to arrive at that. Obviously, without direction from us, Craig, you're reporting what you've got to report, and once we've clarified that what we require, I'm sure it will be delivered, because you'll have a clear direction to take and give us that information. It's not actually about information overload, as Annalisa said. It's actually about the conciseness and the delivery of the information that we have. So work in progress. David, you've got some final comments?
Well, a final comment was just to remind everybody that the site visit for the December meeting is actually around many of these major projects that we report on. So it'll be a good way to finish the year, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, David. If there are no further questions, the recommendation sits, go back, that major projects financial and contract performance report to 30 August 2020 be received for information. We're going to move for that. Sam again, and Bob, all in favour? Against? Carried. Move forward to number 5, pages 40 to 89. Review of Treasury Risk Management Policy. So Kelvin, you're going to present to us on that. Let you speak through to those recommended track changes, Kelvin, and your vision as to where we sit with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've got the revised Treasury policy. The policy is reviewed by PwC, and PwC support us in making a number of changes. The changes are not too significant in it. The first, they sort of sit in 3 main areas. The first being the provision of our CCO, so SICON, etc., within the framework. The reasons for this are twofold. One, the impact that the CCO can have upon our borrowing ability. While we're in a good position at the moment, there may be a time where we need to make borrowing, and that could impact our ability to borrow. And secondly, focused on our ability to pass on debt, to lend internally to our CCO, but the CCO also has a provision to be able to borrow from the LGFA, and therefore monitoring of that is important. Those changes are on pages 52 and 55. Moving the second substantial change is change around funding risk control limits. These have really been put in place because there's greater tenure out in the banks to be able to borrow at a greater tenure. And so we've just shifted that out a little way. It gives us greater flexibility when we're looking for debt in the future. That change is on page 65. And connected with that is the risk parameters around managing our risk exposure. With that movement in tenure, we need to adjust the tenure around the fixed versus variable interest rates. Again, provides us a little bit more flexibility, and that changes on page 61. I'll take the rest of that as read and take any questions, Mr. Chair.
And Lisa.
Yeah, great amendments, very good approach. Role and delegation. So you read it through thoroughly. Just a couple of things to think about, really. So I give them obviously appreciate PwC, but what's going around the time and PwC date on their report, whether their report was post change.
I might just defer to Greg on that if you've dated the reports and changes.
Obviously, information to go through from PwC in September. They made all of that sort of technical changes, and we made all of that process changes.
So my first point was around, I guess, understanding the cost of funds in relation to the rating. So obviously it's great that we've got AA rating, and obviously there's also that that's obviously actual terms of what that rating is. But do we understand, I guess, what a drop or what the benefit of that rating is for a drop? What the cost of a drop in that rating would be, i.e. having a conversation with the banks around, I guess that rating is getting a
I don't have the specific figures, but it is a really good point. And yeah, and what I would like to do is with the Treasury reporting is to make sure we focus upon those credit ratings and what the key measures are to make sure that we're aware of where they are and what a movement on one of those measures would do to our credit rating. Yeah.
The net borrowing, the change in terminology to revenue to borrowing, so that's probably understand that and it's a disparity in consistency of language. But when I got to the annual report, and I said about net borrowing, so do we need to make sure that if we're adopting the Treasury policies before we sign off the bill, we need to have consistency in the language. But not just matter. Something to think about. Obviously, we can sign off your work and then get just language.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll just take a quick review of that.
Yeah, so the interest rate changes, which are actually quite and I get where you're coming from, post GFC, ultimately everyone's been taking a short-term route. But I just wanted to make sure that council are comfortable with the ability for, again, I understand the delegation around this, but it is in effect saying that one person could lock in 90% of our debt for 1 year, which seems quite aggressive. But again, for this council and the balance sheet of this council, and innovation of this council, and the new roles that you created, there may be some risk. But if I didn't have that understanding, I would have to on the sheet as they are. We want to know what our costs are going to be. I understand that's how we can work. Not favorable decisions, and maybe we do want to comfortable with that. And maybe if they are, if not, then maybe look at different options. If we're comfortable with that, but we are no longer 70 and 90 1 year, maybe we want to do that on that something. Maybe civil management say we are taking a more approach. It's not just one person taking. Yeah, I don't want to create work, I don't want to create administration. And maybe it's not possible. It's probably very well outlined. It's given you more
It's a good point, Annalise, and I think the approaches I've taken in the past with this sort of thing would be to be not only showing our current position to the subcommittee here, but to show our forecast position of where our borrowings are and to be starting to discuss strategies around where we're heading rather than locking something in, that we weren't all fully signed up for.
Thank you. Greg, I know you've presented twice when we've received our AA+ rating, and you've given commentary around the benefits of that, and perhaps you just refresh our memories as to the economic benefits of a AA rating.
So when you look at the paper management
Thanks, Greg. Deborah.
Yes, but I have a query about 4.8, and I guess it's the new wording, we would come down to council control, foreign council control organisation. Any length of arrangement with approved by council. Then we have in the same sentence, in recommending an arrangement for approval, the chief executive considers the following. Now, just for clarification, we are not giving a delegation to the chief executive through this change to fully understand where it sits within our delegation manual that we're responsible for, because I want some clarity around that, around what our responsibilities are as governance sitting around the table and giving, if it is a delegation, to the chief executive to consider these, and I presume bring a report back to council. Is that how I should be reading it?
That's correct, yeah. It's the delegation remains with the council to approve that, but chief executive is considering each of those points, and in their recommendation to council, they'll be outlining those points being covered off to satisfy the council's that yes, we'll go ahead with buying or not. Yeah.
Kelvin, I signalled a couple of questions before the meeting. First one is, what is the impact on council swaps if we go into a negative interest rate environment? Is council liable for the margin of those interest rate swaps, and what are under our current agreement, and are we in a position to renegotiate that?
Look, Mr. Chair, I'd have to actually go back and take a look at actually the detail of the agreements, but it's going to be an interesting space if we do get that negative rate. Yeah, but yeah, I'll take a point to go and check that out.
I think it just might be worth looking into, assuming we ever get to that situation. It may not happen, but it may. The second one is we've got loans to CPW crossed off, obviously because we've had those loans discharged some time ago. But I'm just wondering in the current environment that we perhaps have the ability to leave those here for resilience projects if we're anticipating a potential pipeline through to Darfield, and discussions around Three Waters and where we might sit with that for water supply. My personal opinion is that perhaps we need to leave that on there for a period of time until we see that. They're not a CCO or a CCTO, but obviously we are a shareholder and we do have an interest in the outcome. It's not suggesting that we would. It's just suggesting that if we remove it, we don't have the ability to do so. It might be beneficial to the district to have that ability, as much as we did with the Near River Recharge project as well.
Yeah, I'll take that on board and take a look through that process of whether it should be there. But yeah, I take the advice. I think it's a good point.
There's potentially a contentious topic. Has anyone got any discussion around that? I've lobbed that in there, Sam.
Yeah, I agree. I guess the project itself needs to be preferred for funding. That's a preferred project. Any decision around who's going to carry out any work will need to be determined. So I'm hearing the rationale behind not wanting to cut something off the knees, but we might do it later, but also that we're going to go through a proper process with make sure that we stand it well, and would want to bring that with a decision at the moment. I don't see a reason why we couldn't. And Dean or anyone else that we might need for a project of that scale back into this.
Yeah, it wasn't around preempting an outcome. It's actually, and it's not so much about delivery of the wastewater pipeline. It's about water resilience going forward, and the ability to perhaps have the ability to get into an arrangement. But I take on board your point. It doesn't preclude us having a discussion going forward. Yeah. So.
Sorry, just on that point, remembering that this is made is private company, right? Structured through our shareholding that actually have. I'm conscious of the fact that we are also needs to be consideration of our consultation to this particular process. And how it's going to take forward to manage base rate, so move to base rate, that's a great plan. Really need to through public consultation that actually so so there's a lot we can done ownership of the proposed if that pipeline ground, would it be right to owns it? That own it through structure. Sorry, but this is a conversation itself and but it definitely
I think my question has morphed into a discussion about the type of delivery and the type of project. It's not, that wasn't the intention. The intention is about retaining the ability to lend monies to that organisation should we decide on a project. So Kelvin, if you want to do some further work on that, but I'm sort of hearing around the table that it's probably a dead issue, unless I hear differently. So unless there's support for that continuing, I'll withdraw that. Yes, Sam?
Yes, clarity around that is what's at the moment, really for the extension of the scheme, and the scheme is effectively fully built. So if there is a need for other funding, actually is, so I'm not saying that we do or we don't. It's that the mechanism that this was put in here for with around the irrigation scheme.
Fully understand that, and the mechanism was there to achieve an outcome for the Canterbury Water Management Strategy. You could argue that hasn't been achieved yet, but it was part of the process of achieving that outcome. So, yeah, park that for the moment, Kelvin. Any further queries, Kelvin and Lisa?
Yeah, just one final small thing. So good commentary and update around the support to the CCTOs and like the addition of no guarantee. I just wondered whether we needed to broaden the scope of that to any external providers that we support in the form of debt. So I think because in the annual report at the moment we've got that contingent liability to the rugby club that we shouldn't be called on, but that's through a guarantee. So do we need to just broaden the scope that we will not be guaranteed to any, not just the CCO or CCTO, but I think in 5.5.4 of loan advances, we've talked about how we may support charitable trusts and other community, other organisations. But maybe either in there or either in the other bit where we talk about no guarantee, just so that we don't fall into this circumstance we have at the moment where we've got a contingent liability on our books because of that rugby club incident. I guess that would be your discretionary right to not be, someone would have to make the decision not to be guaranteed anyway. So I don't know if it's helpful to just get that in here as well, that we are not guaranteed under any circumstances to anyone. If that's the position that we want to be in. I mean, if we don't want to be guaranteed for a CCO or CCTO, I wouldn't think we'd want to be guaranteed for a rugby club. I'd actually say there's more risk with a rugby club than there is for a CCO or CCTO.
And again, I think that does include the Russian tax was saying our starting point and our stance is the no.
Yeah.
And then there's things that need to be discussed.
Yeah.
I agree.
Good starting point. I guess there's always community good that we want to. Yeah.
I guess that the clarity around that is, yes, the starting point is no. Does this preclude us then having a discussion? If we've got a direct no in here, does that preclude us then having a discussion because it's against our policy to then be able to do that? I don't think we're going to arrive at that clarity today, are we? Kelvin, have you got a comment around that?
It is a good point around finality of it. Maybe we could word something around that, that the intention would be not to provide guarantees. There'll be exceptional circumstances which would require full council approval or something like that. Yeah, gives it a bit of an out.
So I guess process-wise from here, we've had a couple of amendments. We can move, I think we can move that the amended Treasury Risk Management Policy be referred to Council for adoption with the addition of those which will go to full council to debate and discuss. Is the subcommittee comfortable with that approach? I think rather than debate them to death here, we're going to re-debate them around the council table. They're relatively minor changes. In the grand scheme of things, the percentages and dollar values are of far more risk to us from the perspective of the business committee. So that's my suggestion to this committee. David, yeah, I'll move in that direction. If I get a second to that. So will you second that motion, Lisa? Yep. So moved and seconded with the additions of those items that we've discussed here to go through as part of that for adoption to full council. All in favour? Against? Carried.
And that'll go on the council agenda, Mr. Chair, for the meeting of the 28th of October.
Thank you, David. Well done. Thanks, Kelvin and team, for working through that for us. We're now to item 6, the very meaty part of the agenda, pages 90 to 244, a draft annual report for 2019-2020. Julian, you wanting to come up the front with Kelvin and present that as a group? Are you comfortable?
So, Mr. Chair, just while our auditors and Craig are joining Kelvin at the front to speak to this report, I just want to acknowledge the work, firstly, of our staff led by Craig through this process. Again, a tremendous amount of work is required to get this document to the point that it is. Really acknowledge your work, Craig, that's been done in tight time frames as well. And also just secondly to Julian and Sam and the audit team, thank you for the way you've conducted your audit work. And I guess collectively as an organisation for the results, and the team, when they get to the front, will talk through the report firstly, and then the auditor should secondly, Mr. Chair. But it has been another very, very good year for council financially in terms of our operating performance, in terms of the strength of our balance sheet, and also the achievements that we've had during the course of the year, and something that as elected members you should be very, very proud of.
Thank you, David. Julian, are you wanting to go up at the front, and Sam? Yeah, and join Kelvin at the front and do presentation. Yeah.
I'll just ask staff to talk to the report,
yeah, and
point out the highlights of the year in the first instance. And then Julian and Sam, if I can get you to talk to the audit issues. The end point of this process, so we'll start at the end and work backwards, is that having had the discussion today, there is a recommendation that we receive the draft and recommend it to council for adoption. That will go on the council agenda for the meeting of the 28th of October. Kelvin and Craig.
Thanks, David. Yes, so the 28th of October for that. Just introduce Julian 10 immediately to my right, and Sam Naylor to beyond Julian. You find the report here tabled. I just want to cover a couple of quick things before I hand over to Craig to run through some of the highlights which that were included in the paper. The audit is largely complete, but Julian and team will talk through that. There's a few smallish matters still outstanding around audit testing, nothing substantial that the council should be concerned about, but Julian will address those. Secondly, the most substantial matter which is new within this report is in relation to the notes associated with COVID-19. As you'll appreciate, it's something that's being faced by all businesses and organisations worldwide. So there's particular emphasis around the impacts of COVID-19 on financial statements, so that from year to year they can be relied upon, and we can see the impacts and any pressures which may be impacting relative organisations. Thankfully, we are progressing well through this, and there's nothing substantial within that for us. That will include a large note within the financial statements, and Julian will outline the impact around the audit opinion and how that will reflect that. So I'll just hand to Craig to talk through the highlights.
Good morning. So if we turn to page 91 of the agenda, that's for the page I'll start on. So it's just my cover report. So I'm outlining there at the bottom of the page the comparison to budget for our expenditure. Sort of key point to note with the expenditure is it's about $1 million under budget. That's due to our finance costs being 1.9 million below budget. It's just partly due to our borrowing requirement and also changes in interest rates, reduced interest rates. Depreciation is also below budget. The cost of sales is about $900,000 above budget. That's associated with our sale of iZone land. So just the timing of that land, there's a cost of sale component to the sale of the land. The main point which is a bit higher than our budget is the subsidised maintenance on our roading network. So it's 2.7 million above budget. We also wrote off a couple of properties in Lincoln and Darfield due to our developments in those two townships. On the page 92, I talk through the revenue variances. So we're $190 million compared to 146 or 147 million budget. That is due to rates revenue being 1.1 million above budget due to the substantial population growth in the district being faster than we expected. Dividend revenue was below budget. That was partially due to a timing of the receipt of dividend from Orion. So Orion declared their dividend in September and paid that in September, which falls outside of the annual report period. So we received that dividend in September. That was partially offset by a higher dividend from Sycon. We received $1.5 million dividend compared to a budgeted dividend of 800,000. There's also some sort of extraordinary items in our revenue. So development contributions revenue was $10 million above budget due to the timing of growth in the district. Fees and charges revenue 1.1 million above budget. That variance is mainly due to the building activity and the building consents, resource consents activity associated with the growth. Vested asset revenue was 25.8 million above budget. That is just the assets that developers vest in the council. It's just a timing issue when that development takes place. And it's quite a hard one to budget. As I talked earlier with the cost of sales associated with the iZone sale of property, the revenue side of it is 3.3 million above budget due to the sale of the property over there. The other one that's a non-cash movement is the fair value movement in our investment property. So we had a $1.1 million increase above budget for the movement of those properties, mainly just investment properties. We have, on the balance sheet side of things, we have had a positive cash flow, positive operating cash flow of 47 million, and our net assets increased by 192 million during the year. The main movement in that asset increase is due to the revaluation of our investments, so Sycon, Orion, and also our roading and water infrastructure assets. So on page 93, as Kelvin alluded to earlier, this is just a direct duplicate of the main note that's included in the accounts associated with COVID. I'll just run through just some key points there. I talk about the additional cash holding that we held during the COVID period. So ordinarily our cash holding is 15 million. We increased that and held back some of our term deposits during that period in very low sort of interest bearing accounts just to make sure that we had enough liquidity during that period. So that resulted in it. Oh, it's gone off. Also, during the period of the lockdowns, we had 90% of our staff either working in a business as usual sort of scenario or helping with the COVID response in a civil defence capacity. The work in our major capital projects were impacted during the level 4 lockdown, but that continued again during level 3, and we've caught up most of that work in the preceding periods after lockdown. There was also some planned maintenance work at the Selwyn Aquatic Centre that was going to result in a close down for a period of time. Due to the lockdown, we actually conducted that work during that period, which avoided that close down that was planned. What else have we got here? The other aspect is the civil defence costs. We incurred $226,000 of civil defence costs. Part of those costs are claimable from central government, and we've put a claim in for $130,000, which should be received shortly. And there's just basically a table on page 94 which outlines those sort of comments. The main one is the delay in dividend payment from Orion, which resulted in a $2.2 million drop compared to budget. But that was subsequently received in September. I'd also like to point out, just in the group, in relation to Cycon, Cycon received a $1.65 million wage subsidy from the COVID wage subsidy claim. So that obviously went into their accounts. From an operational performance point of view, we achieved 71% of our KPIs during the period. This result's a little bit lower than previous periods. We've been sitting around sort of that 80 to 90% range. You could say that a lot of those drops are due to the resident survey, which occurred in just after year end. We ran that in July, and there was sort of a negative sort of vibe in those survey responses in terms of the council's unavailability of services, just the mindset of the people completing the survey. It was a bit of an impact on those measures.
Just before other comments, I think the other highlight we need to remind ourselves is during the COVID lockdown, we had our credit rating assessed and we were reinstated with a AA+, which I think underpins not only the performance of council, but the management of council assets as well.
Thank you, David. Any questions around the table? Annalisa?
Yeah, thank you. It's great commentary, and you know, I've been through this process myself, so I fully emphasise that the quantity of work that your team has gone through to get us to this position that we're at. And as you say, a very favourable year. You know, it looks fantastic. I guess I just was sort of wondering, I know I think you alluded to it a little bit around the budget and how difficult it is to get that revenue number closer. And I guess I was sort of looking at some of them, it's obviously in relating to, well, there's two areas. I mean, some of them you know, all made sense, but two areas where I thought, could we get a little bit closer, was the development contribution. So I was wondering whether that 10.6 million, whether that's just purely timing. But is there any way we can get that a little bit closer in future years of understanding, you know, why there is such a big difference? And I guess me just coming up to speed around that vested asset revenue, and you said that's difficult to get that budget number, but you know, that is a big difference. But I'd say it's all going in the right direction. So it's hard to kind of pull that out, but you know, when times are tougher, do we need those numbers to be, can we try and get those numbers a bit closer?
Those numbers are somewhat connected and largely through development activity. Vested assets, of course, just to note, it's a non-cash number. The assets are being passed across to the council. It appears it's a quirk of accounting that it appears in your revenue line, and I would dare say some people say, well, you've done really well this year, but it is a transfer of assets.
Non-cash.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So the timing of those developments concluding and timing of developments commencing can impact those situations, and not knowing what's floating around and what's coming up. it's one we'll put a bit of effort into working on.
I think it's one of those things, Annalisa, that's the foibles of the success of Selwyn District is that our growth has always exceeded our absolute best expectations. And in a well, not post-COVID, we shouldn't say post-COVID, we're very much in COVID. We expected we had presentations to say our building consent numbers, expect them to fall away. Well, in actual fact, they've done the exact opposite, and we've bucked the trend there. And I have some degree of sympathy from an accountant's perspective to try and predict something that we've constantly found to be unpredictable is very difficult. But I understand from a purely accounting point of view, it looks like a disastrous miscalculation, but in reality, we're constantly presented with a growth model that is so excessive that it throws these anomalies at us. I think that in a nutshell, that's probably the reasons, David, I can see you queuing up there to say so. We analyse growth on a frequent basis, and our absolute best estimates are always under.
This might be a stupid question, but the Orion dividend being less because of COVID, is that because they gave subsidies or to users, or what's the COVID relationship to a reduced dividend?
I think it's a difficult one to judge actually what extent the COVID impact was. Definitely timing of the dividend going out, because there was delays in accounts being signed and various things like that would have created a delay at that point. From my understanding, Orion's solid and strong, and the impacts of COVID were reasonably well managed. So, look, I think as Craig noted, it was a very small net impact. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
David, did you want to make a comment at this stage, or should we carry on around the round? Yeah, Deborah.
With regards to the development contributions that are covered by legislation, on the collective development contributions, we actually have to spend them on what was saved within a certain time frame. And I guess the question that we need to ask is, are we actually, are we actually spending it within that time frame? Or do we as audit and risk need to ask for a report to come back around that particular issue to see if any of what we've collected drops off or drops out? Because what you just questioned just triggered my mind to think, well, hang on, does it stay at 10.6, and while we're growing, are there any amounts that may have to internally drop off because we haven't used them within the legislative time frame? So thanks for jogging a memory there. Just one other question with regards to the Orion dividend. We only own 10%, so would it be fair to say that the returns and our timeframes are governed by the majority shareholder with regards to what we have to actually, accept in our annual report?
Yeah, it's largely correct. Yeah, we are a minority, and as a minority, we are sitting down the queue somewhat in terms of influence. But yeah, I think COVID, in terms of the impact upon the likes of New Zealand, Audit New Zealand, and other auditors getting across things, impacted that timing significantly.
Deborah, I think you've raised a question there around the use of DCs, and it could be that that's a report we are asked for annually. I think that's quite appropriate. Often we forward fund a project and retrospectively fund that debt through DCs, but it would be good to get an understanding of where we sit in that process. So I think, David, we could add that to our annual work stream.
Yeah, we will.
We can. Thank you. Sam?
Yeah, just on the DCs, in some ways, I mean, it's money that's coming now, but it's future money that we now will no longer receive. And so just the DCs is a calculation about all the projects that are in our long-term plan, divided by all the development that we know is going to occur, and a number spits out the bottom through the calculation and is revised annually, or every 3 years anyway, through the long-term plan. So it's good to get the money now, but it's not new money or unexpected money. It's just money that we've got this year and we will now no longer get next year because of the timing.
Thank you. Julian, Sam, would you like to make some comments? Well, you've got the opportunity, you've got a captive audience, so.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and councillors. I have a very, very short status report to give to the meeting. As David mentioned at the start of the meeting, the audit is substantively finished. So what we have left is the internal file review. I've nearly finished all of my review process, but because Southern District Council has grown its size for the first time this year, we have had to appoint a peer review director sitting somewhere else to review the annual report for us this year. That's in accordance with the Auditor General's auditing standards. So that's pure compliance on the audit team's part. The big part remaining for the audit is the reporting end. So there was Kevin was alluding to the COVID impact. In terms of our audit report, we will be including an emphasis on meta paragraph in the annual report regarding the COVID impact, and I suspect there's potentially also an EOM paragraph around the valuation of your assets because of the significant uncertainty that the value has put to those assets that were subject to revaluation. The audit of SciCon has been completed. I'm pleased to tell you that the audit went very well this year. I think there were some reservations in previous years, but the relationship I believe has been a complete reset. So I think that's mainly what I want to tell you. We are on target to be able to report on the 28th of this month. So you would not need to make use of the statutory extension of deadlines for local government. Happy to take questions. Sam has got all the answers.
Yes, congratulations, Julian, and your team. That's really good news, and particularly around your comments around the reporting back from SciCon. It has been a bone of contention in previous years, and we've certainly worked hard as a group here at council to improve our relationship with them and extend through to the SciCon group our desire to see that go more smoothly this year. So it's very pleasing to have that come back to us as well, and yeah, a great outcome for us all around. So, Sam.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, Julian. Maybe it's just having a new auditor on the team for us here at Selwyn, and yourself take some credit for what's going on as well. A relationship between us and our auditors goes both ways, and we've had a good relationship with John before now, but it's been great the work that you've put in and proactively wanted to continue a good relationship with our auditors and with our CCOs as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And the question, I guess, around SciCon is now that we're at the space where this year's been a good year, as far as timing and getting things done, do you feel that the processes are in place for that to be able to continue now into the future? And we've got over that hurdle of the last couple of years of hiccups. Can we stay prepared so that we don't slip back next year?
Well, we look forward to gradual improvement on all matters, including interaction with management in preparing the annual report and the state of readiness for audit. So we can only go as fast as your team. We clearly rely on information being provided to us timely. There are matters that we believe that we could improve further. There was some initial discussion just this morning around valuation, around roading assets, because of the scale of the work needed to be done over valuation work. We may have to come to some agreement around the frequency of those revaluations. So that's one example. But thank you. I ought to have said at the very start that we are happy to take questions and accept compliments.
Annalisa, did you have a question? Your light's gone off. Microphone.
Yeah, thank you for your work. A big job when you look at the quantity of that annual report. So being able to give an opinion on it is no easy feat. I guess from the Audit and Risk Committee's hat that we're all wearing around the table, we'd rather not have an emphasis of matter. So I just wanted to understand the COVID commentary of that being the emphasis of matter. Is that standard that is across the board of all entities that you're auditing, or is it because of the nature of Selwyn that is pushing it into that category, I guess?
The Auditor General has clearly signaled to his appointed auditors that he is expecting to see some commentary in the audit report for all public entities with 30th June balance dates.
Yeah.
So SciCon is no exception. SciCon and 7 district councils, no exception.
I get the emphasis. I mean, I get the commentary part.
Sure.
I'm just the actual term of emphasis of matter.
Yep.
Is that what OAG are suggesting?
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah, that's correct. So just for clarity, the emphasis on matter paragraph is not a qualified opinion.
Yeah.
So what the auditor is doing is basically drawing the reader's attention to the disclosure made in the notes to the accounts, because they are of such importance to an understanding of the financial statements, or in fact your statement of service performance.
That's fine. I understand the difference between emphasis of matter and qualified opinion. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't Selwyn that was, if that's an OAG.
No,
that's fine.
that's the OAG, yes.
And I guess as our role today, I mean, I'm not sure where we're getting to at the end of this annual report, but I thought we'd be in a position to be able to endorse the annual report to go to full council, but I don't really feel like I can do that without seeing your draft.
Yeah, that's. I think that's prudent. We had a discussion with David yesterday and Kelvin. The suggestion is for David to recommend, as opposed to the committee around recommending the annual report subject to final review by Audit New Zealand. And as I said, I don't expect big matters to emerge. The big matters that we've dealt with around the evaluation of your roading network, impairment test of your other assets not revalued, valuation of your assets that are held at fair value. So you're talking about SciCon, you're talking about your 10% shareholding in Orion, and the concluding bits around consolidation work. We're just looking through those as we speak. So, from my side, as soon as we get the draft audit report, we'll share it with council. We will release the representation letter, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed we are able to provide a report to council on the final audit. We will only be talking about the key matters from the final audit rather than the minor issues. I'm suggested to management that we might have to deal with those in a more efficient way, having a separate discussion.
Yeah, thanks for those clarifications. With that in mind, and said no further questions around the table, I'd like to move the two recommendations there with the constraints that we still have those outstanding matters to come before full council. So bearing that in mind, Kelvin,
Mr. Chair, on a process matter, what I will do is circulate the audit report, but I'll also circulate any changes that have occurred between now and then, so you're aware of any changes and provide commentary.
Thank you. That was a good suggestion and along the lines of what I'm expecting. So I shall move that with the constraints that we've just talked about. Sam, would be really appropriate if you seconded it, I think. Yeah, thank you. All in favour? Against? Carried. That reaches the end of our public portion of the meeting, and what I'm suggesting we do is that we move into PX and immediately break for a cup of tea. and then we can resume here. Julian and Sam, if you're wishing to stay on and we'll have councillor only time, you're welcome to join us for a cup of tea, and I think the rest of the portion of the PX will be relatively short. And just a note that we are having our cup of tea in the executive pod today because of the voting. So I'll have someone move into PX, please. Sam and Shane, all in favour? Against? Carried. Thank everyone for their attendance at this meeting and those viewing online.